Today we'll be changing the spark plugs on my F90 M5. I have some NGK 97506 spark plugs. So the first step is to disconnect the battery. We'll have to remove the DMEs, so you'll want to disconnect the battery before removing the DMEs. Grab a 10mm socket and a trim tool with a hook to it, as we'll have to go over to the trunk and lift up the bottom trim panel or the trunk panel with this trim tool and disconnect the battery. So under the edge here, take your trim tool, get the hook under there and lift this up. Then you can pull it back. Then we can see the battery. So take your 10mm socket and loosen the negative terminal, wiggle it up and push it to the side. Be sure to push this cover over the latch, as you don't want the trunk closing with the battery disconnected. I like to tie a towel around the trunk latch as well to prevent this from happening. I had a buddy that closed his trunk with the battery disconnected on his F82, and we had to take a golf club through the back seat crack and try to hit this seat latch release with that golf club. Then we crawled through and were able to connect the battery and get the trunk popped again. But you don't want to go through that hassle, so pull the cover over and put a towel on the latch. So you might be thinking, how do we get to the spark plugs in this engine bay? It's pretty tightly packed. First step will be to remove these covers. So you'll want to remove this cover, the DME covers. Next, we'll have to remove both DMEs. Take a picture of each side to remember where the cables go. To release these cables, you press on this tab here and pull back on this one. Next, we'll have to take off this cover around the DME. There are tabs along the sides and a couple wires over on the back side here. So this is the first time I'm doing it. I'll go around and disconnect as much as I can and tell you what needs to be disconnected. Okay, here's what you need to do. We have these tabs all along this top cover. So you have one there, one over here, and there's one back here on the opposite side of this one. I think it's right along there. Take all those off. You're able to lift this cover off to the side and slide the DME out. That will expose the ability to take off all of these wires that are on the back side. So without taking the DME off and this cover off, it's very tough to get to the clips on these wires. So we can see here, let me try to zoom in here. There's one clip. And then on this one, there'll be a clip in there where you'll take a pick tool and release this plug. So what we're trying to do here is we're trying to disconnect all the wires to be able to get this cover out of here and out of our way. Here's what that cover looks like off the car. There's a clip there, one there, one there. And then on this back side here, you have several wires clipped into here. The front two wires have hooks that go over the bottom of this cover. This back one right here, this has a plug here with a little hook on it. So you take a pick tool and you push that to the side. On the driver's side, looks like we have the same tabs. So we'll go all around this guy and loosen these tabs to get this cover off. And then we'll see what wires try to come along with it. I ended up removing this wire here with the pick tool. So it goes down in this groove. This tab here is beneath this plug. So you take a pick tool and press on that. Then you're able to remove this wire. For this front wire, we have a tab underneath here. So take a pick tool, press on this tab and slide it off. Now that we have this cover loose, we can look in here and see the bottom of the two wires, the two connections under here. So we'll take a pick tool and we'll press on those two tabs back there to release those wires from this top. So the key on both sides is getting this top cover to the DME loose by pressing on these tabs. It's 4 tabs around this cover. Once you're able to lift this cover up, you're able to get access to the wires underneath, or the connections, and pull the wire connections off the cover. Now that we have the DMEs out, we have to look at what else it takes to remove these trays. On the passenger side, you can see we have a whole bunch of stuff that's still within the same tray. So I don't think you have to disconnect all of this. There's a tab on the back here that will press to release this, and you can pull this whole unit up and off to the side. I think that will be enough. I don't think we have to unplug all of this to then start taking off the bolts on this tray. It looks like we have one back there. Let's see what we got up here. That may be the only one, but we'll see as we go. Might be something down there, but we'll start taking all that off and I'll let you know what I have to take off to get this tray out. All right, I got the DME holder out. There's a couple things you have to do. So you can take this unit out. You don't have to disconnect everything there. You just have to disconnect this end one here by pulling up on that tab and lifting it off to the side. You have a bolt in the back, and then you have this bracket up front. So sitting about right here, there's a bolt into the side and a bolt into the DME holder. Goes right here. So I took off the bolt on the side, and then I disconnected this wire from the holder. That allowed me to lift the DME up enough to be able to get this bolt out. I still had to use a swivel extension here to be able to get the right angle to reach that bolt. Now on the driver's side, we'll start by taking out these two bolts and this bolt back here. All right, I have the driver's side DME holder out, just 3 bolts, these two and one back here, and then a clip for a wire that sits up on top here. Looks like to be able to take the coils off on the passenger side, we have to remove this wiring harness, this holder here. So to do that, we'll have to pop these 2 screws off, then pop the screws off holding this here. If you have trouble maneuvering this guy around, you can take these 2 screws off as well. On the driver's side, we'll definitely have to take off this coolant reservoir, or at least loosen it. You don't have to take it off completely. So we'll take off these 2 bolts and move this up and off to the side, and hopefully that will give us enough access to all of the coils. Looks like this might be in the way, so we'll probably have to pop that off as well. You'll want to take off the 2 bolts holding in this wiring harness. So if I can lift this out of the way, let me put my camera down for a second. Lift this guy up. So with the coolant reservoir out of the way, you can see those 2 bolts down there to take off that wiring harness. Remove that. That allows that to remove freely, and we can get to the coils on this side now. To take these coils out, you pull up on this tab here. It'll pop up, push it all the way up, and then the wire will come loose. Then you can take an extension and try pulling up on these coils. They're in there pretty good, so you might need some extra leverage. Now you'll want to take your spark plug socket and a wobble extension and go through and take out all of the spark plugs. Before you throw in the new spark plugs, check the gap. If you're going stage 2, it's recommended that you go with a 0.022 gap. So grab your feeler gauge. Let's see if we can show the numbers here. 0.022 and a spark plug gapper. And you'll put your spark plug in there and try to gap it as close to 0.022 as you can. All of the passenger side spark plugs are removed. I'm ready to put in the new spark plugs. So place the spark plug in your socket. You should have a socket to where the spark plug sticks in there and it won't come loose and drop into the cylinder. If you don't, you can use a magnet, try to drop it in that way, or reach in there and hold the spark plug as far down as you can and let it go. You don't want to just drop these things in there and potentially damage the tip. So we'll be threading these in by hand and then tightening them to 23 newton meters. All the spark plugs are back in and torqued down. Now it's time to put the coils back on. These coils, they're directional. So they have a little notch here. You'll see that they have a notch on the side of the valve cover. So you push these down, make sure they're down all the way snug. Leave this thing up, this clip up, then you'll find the wire, plug that in, and pull that clip down. It'll keep this plug snug into the coil. All the coils are back in, None of them were too challenging. The front ones, a little bit, you're tight on space for that wire going into the coil. So now that the coils are back in, we can start putting everything back together. We'll start with these wires that we took off of this tray. We'll put those bolts back in on both sides, and we'll hook up the coolant reservoirs again. Then we'll start to put in the DME holders. The bolts for the wiring harnesses are back in place, and for the coolant reservoirs, now we're going to put the DME holders back in place. The DMEs are back in and all of the connections are back on the DMEs. Refer back to the pictures you took earlier for the order and follow the colors. Here's another look at it. We got no color, gray, blue, green, yellow, white. White, yellow, green, blue, say gray, and no color. So you put the trays in, put the DME in, then put the cover back on, then wire everything back up. When you go to wire everything back up, don't forget to plug the wires into their holders on that cover. The covers are back on, and that's all for this job. Now that I have spark plugs gapped at 0.022 and high flow downpipes, I'll be going stage 2. Stay tuned for videos on what the stage 2 tune feels like and sound clips of the car.